A millionaire thought his world had ended the night his only son died, until one winter evening. His girlfriend pointed to a homeless child and whispered, "He looks like your dead son." What begins as pity soon unravels into a haunting mystery. Was this boy sent by fate, or hiding a truth that could destroy everything? Stay with me, because this story will break your heart and heal it in ways you never imagined. This is not just a story. It's a piece of someone's hidden pain, quietly waiting to be heard. In today's story, we dive into a moment that can change everything, in the most unexpected way. Before we begin, where are you listening from? Canada? The US? Norway? Let us know in the comments, because stories may begin anywhere, but they connect us all. Stay with us until the very end, because sometimes, what breaks your heart can also heal it. And if you believe stories can change lives, hit subscribe. Join our journey. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment. Your voice matters here. The city never really slept. Neon lights flickered across rain-soaked pavements, where footsteps and car horns merged into a restless lullaby. Among the skyscrapers, those giant glass towers of ambition, lived men who could buy anything but peace. One of them was Alexander Grant. To the world he was a titan, a self-made millionaire with the kind of power that bent doors open before he even knocked. But beneath his perfectly tailored suits and endless accounts, lay a man whose heart had been shattered years ago. He had once been a father, once. The memory was carved into his bones, his little boy's laughter in the garden, the tiny hands clutching his finger, the night of the accident that tore it all away. Since that day, Alexander had built walls taller than his empire, walls even his girlfriend, Isabella, could barely climb. She was young, beautiful, and determined to thaw the frozen chambers of his heart. But fate has its own cruel poetry. One rainy evening, as Alexander and Isabella stepped out of his black limousine near a five-star restaurant, she froze. Her gaze fixed on the other side of the street. Huddled beneath a flickering lamppost was a child, thin, dirty, his clothes torn by life's cruelty. His eyes were hollow, but when he turned his face toward them, Isabella gasped and gripped Alexander's arm. Her voice trembled. "Alex, he looks like your dead son." Alexander's world tilted. The rain pattered like 1,000 whispers against the pavement, each drop echoing inside Alexander's head as he stared across the street. The boy sat curled against a crumbling brick wall, his hair matted, his arms wrapped around his knees for warmth. He was no more than 10, but there was something in his posture, fragile yet unyielding, that tugged at a place Alexander had buried deep. Isabella's hand remained tight on his arm, her knuckles pale. "Tell me I'm not imagining it," she whispered. His face, those eyes. Alexander swallowed hard. He hadn't allowed himself to think of his son in years. The pain was a wound he kept stitched shut with silence. But now, staring at the boy, his heart betrayed him, beating wildly, painfully, as if it recognized something his mind refused to. The chauffeur cleared his throat politely, holding the restaurant's umbrella. "Mom, your reservation. Cancel it," Alexander snapped, his voice sharper than intended. He stepped into the rain, ignoring the chauffeur's confusion. Each stride across the street felt heavier, as though he were walking against time itself. The boy lifted his head when Alexander's shadow fell over him. His eyes, gray with flecks of stormy blue, met Alexander's, and for a fleeting, unbearable second, it was like looking into a mirror of the past. "What's your name, son?" Alexander asked, his voice uneven. The boy hesitated, clutching a torn blanket closer to his chest. "Ethan," he murmured. His voice was soft, hoarse, as if speaking cost him effort. Alexander froze. His son's name had been Ethan, too. Isabella gasped again behind him. "Alex." But Alexander couldn't answer her. His thoughts churned in chaos. Coincidence? It had to be. Names were common. Faces could resemble. He told himself this, clung to it, but his chest burned with a wild, impossible hope. "You're cold," Alexander said gently, kneeling so his eyes were level with the boy's. "Where are your parents?" Ethan's gaze dropped. "Don't have any." The words sliced through Alexander like glass. Behind them, the city roared on. People rushing past, umbrellas shielding them from the storm, none sparing a glance at the child who seemed invisible to the world. But not to Alexander. Not anymore. He extended a hand, his own trembling. "Come with me. I'll get you something warm. Something to eat." The boy's eyes flickered with suspicion, the kind that only a child abandoned too many times could carry. He looked at Alexander's hand as though it were a trap, then slowly, hesitantly, reached for it. Their fingers touched, and Alexander's world cracked open. Because in that instant, in that fragile contact, he felt something familiar. A warmth, a weight, a memory. The same way his son's tiny hand had once fit into his. But before Alexander could breathe, before he could process, Ethan whispered something that froze the blood in his veins. "Why did you leave me, Dad?" Alexander's heart stops at the boy's words. Was this just a child's desperate imagination? Or something darker, something that would unravel everything he thought he knew? The rain seemed to fade into silence, though it still dripped from Alexander's hair and soaked through his suit. His chest tightened, breath shallow, as the boy's words echoed in his mind. Why did you leave me, Dad? It wasn't possible. It couldn't be. His son had died in that car crash years ago. He had held his small, lifeless body in his arms. He had buried him. He had grieved him until there was nothing left to grieve. And yet this boy's voice, fragile and accusing, made his heart clench in recognition. Alexander swallowed, forcing himself to steady. What did you just say? You, the boy, Ethan, shrank back slightly, his fingers tightening on the tattered blanket. His eyes darted between Alexander and Isabella, who stood frozen a few steps behind, rain streaking down her mascara-stained cheeks. I asked why you left me, the boy said again, quieter this time, his voice trembling as if the words had been locked inside him too long. Alexander's throat constricted. He didn't know how to answer, didn't even know what the question meant. I think you're mistaken. I didn't leave you. His voice broke. I lost my son. His name was Ethan too. The boy blinked, as though trying to process, then whispered, lost me. The rawness of those two words cut him deeper than any blade. Alexander reached out again, desperate to hold on to the boy before he disappeared like smoke. No, listen to me. You're not him. You can't be. Ethan's gaze hardened with sudden defiance, a spark of fire in his storm, gray eyes. Then why do you look like him? Why do you know my name? Alexander staggered, caught between reality and the unbearable whisper of hope. He wanted to deny it, to insist that this was coincidence, but every fiber of him screamed otherwise. The boy's eyes, his voice, even the faint scar above his eyebrow. His son had had the same scar from when he'd fallen off a bicycle at 4 years old. Isabella finally stepped closer, her hand trembling as she touched Alexander's shoulder. Alex, she whispered, this doesn't make sense. But look at him, really look. Can you honestly say he's not?
I'll stop?
Alexander snapped, his voice harsh, laced with pain. He turned away from her, then back to the boy. Tell me, Ethan, where did you come from? Who takes care of you? Who? The child's eyes dulled. Nobody. I've been on my own for a long time. Something inside Alexander cracked at those words. He saw not just a boy, but a ghost resurrected from the ruins of his past. A child starved of love, of warmth, of safety. A child who could so easily have been his Ethan, if life had not stolen him away. A long silence stretched between them, broken only by the hiss of tires on wet asphalt and the distant rumble of thunder. Finally, Alexander crouched lower, his face close to the boy's. Listen, I don't know what this is. I don't know why you remind me so much of my son. But you don't belong here. Not on this street, not in the cold. You're coming with me. Ethan's eyes widened, suspicion warring with longing. You'd take me? Just like that? Alexander nodded firmly.
Yes, just like that.
For a moment, hope flickered in the boy's eyes. He shifted as though preparing to rise, when suddenly a rough voice cut through the night. Step away from the kid. Alexander froze and turned. From the shadows near the alley, a man emerged. Tall, gaunt, with sunken cheeks and wild eyes. His clothes were ragged, but his stance was menacing, a dangerous edge in the way he held his hands clenched. That boy's not yours, the man growled, his gaze burning into Alexander. He belongs to me. The mysterious man claims ownership of Ethan. But why? And why does the child look at him with a mixture of fear and silent obedience? The rain had slowed to a mist, but the tension in the air was thick enough to choke on. Alexander rose slowly from where he crouched, instinctively shielding Ethan behind him. The boy's small hands clutched the fabric of his coat, and Alexander could feel the tremor in his grip. The man who had stepped from the alley was no ordinary vagrant. His eyes burned with a feverish intensity, the kind that came from long years of bitterness and survival on the fringes of society. His posture was predatory, not pitiful, as though the city itself had hardened him into something dangerous. Who are you? Alexander demanded, his voice hard, though his chest thundered with unease. The man sneered, revealing teeth yellowed and broken. Doesn't matter who I am. What matters is, the boy is mine. He jabbed a finger toward Ethan. And you do well to step away before you regret it. Alexander's jaw tightened. Yours. He's not an object you can claim. He's a child. The man let out a hollow laugh. A child that owes me his life. You think he'd still be breathing if it weren't for me? His voice dripped with menace, and though the rain washed over his skin, his words were venom enough to make Isabella step back in fear. Alexander glanced at Ethan. The boy's eyes had gone wide, filled with something darker than fear, something closer to resignation. He didn't deny the man's claim. He didn't run. He simply gripped Alexander's coat tighter, as though torn between two prisons, neither of which promised safety. Is this true? Alexander asked softly, crouching again to meet Ethan's eyes. Do you know this man? The boy's lips parted, then closed again. His silence was answer enough. The man stepped forward, his boots splashing in a puddle. He knows me. He knows he belongs with me. I've kept him alive when no one else gave a damn. Fed him scraps, kept the wolves of the street off him. He's mine. His words carried a strange, twisted pride, as though abuse disguised itself as guardianship. Alexander's chest burned with anger. Kept him alive. Look at him. He's starving, freezing, dressed in rags. If that's what you call care, then you've failed him. The man's eyes narrowed dangerously. Rich men like you don't understand. Kids like him, they don't survive out here unless they learn who they belong to. And he belongs to me? He lunged forward, reaching for Ethan's arm. Before Alexander could react, Ethan flinched violently and cried out, not a scream, but a whisper so broken it pierced straight through Alexander's soul. Please don't let him take me back. The words snapped something inside Alexander. He shoved himself between the man and Ethan, his voice low and sharp. If you lay a hand on him, I swear you'll regret it. The man froze, staring at him with wild, hateful eyes. For a moment, the rain-slicked street seemed like a battleground. Two men locked in silent war over a fragile boy who had already lost too much. Isabella, clutching her umbrella like a shield, whispered urgently, Alex, call the police. Now. But just as Alexander reached for his phone, the man let out a mocking chuckle. Police. You think they'll believe you over me? You think they'll care about one filthy kid who nobody even knows exists? And then, his expression shifted, almost gleeful, cruel. You don't get it, do you? He's not just any boy. He's special. People have been looking for him. Alexander froze, his pulse racing. What do you mean? The man leaned closer, his voice a hiss. Let's just say, if you knew who his real parents were, you'd think twice before claiming him as yours. The words crashed into Alexander like a wave. Real parents. But hadn't Ethan just said he had none? Ethan, pale and trembling, buried his face against Alexander's coat, refusing to look at the man. His silence was louder than screams. And in that moment, Alexander realized with a chilling certainty, this was no ordinary coincidence. This boy was at the center of something far darker than homelessness. Something that could shatter everything Alexander thought he knew. Who are Ethan's real parents? And why would anyone be searching for him? As Alexander digs deeper, he'll discover secrets that not only bind the boy to a hidden past, but may also unravel his own. The man's words rattled inside Alexander's head long after he vanished into the shadows, muttering curses under his breath and promising he would return. The threat lingered like smoke, but what haunted Alexander most wasn't the menace. It was the man's cryptic claim. If you knew who his real parents were, you'd think twice before claiming him. Alexander couldn't shake it. Back in the limousine, the warmth of leather seats and the soft hum of the engine felt almost obscene against the reality of the boy shivering beside him. Isabella fussed with the blanket the chauffeur had fetched, wrapping it around Ethan's thin shoulders. Her usual elegance seemed stripped away. She looked vulnerable, her eyes wide with worry as she kept glancing at Alexander. He, however, stared only at Ethan. The boy had curled into the corner of the seat, silent, small hands clutching the fabric as if it were his last lifeline. Alexander leaned forward. His voice was softer now, though it carried the weight of a storm. Ethan, I need you to tell me the truth. Do you know who that man was? The boy didn't look up. His lips pressed together tightly, stubbornly. Ethan, Alexander pressed gently, please. I'm not here to hurt you. I need to understand. Finally, the boy's gray, blue eyes lifted, shimmering with something unspoken. He says he saved me. Ethan whispered, but all he ever did was remind me I don't belong anywhere. Alexander's chest tightened. He wanted to pull the boy into his arms, to promise him he was wrong, that he did belong somewhere, but he couldn't yet. Not until he understood the truth behind the man's words. Do you remember your parents? Isabella asked carefully. Ethan hesitated, his eyes flickering between them. Then, almost reluctantly, he shook his head. No faces, no voices. Just a name. Alexander straightened sharply. A name. Whose? Ethan's voice was barely audible. Grant. The word hit Alexander like a physical blow. His breath caught, his vision narrowed, and he had to grip the edge of the seat to ground himself. Grant? Isabella echoed, startled. Her gaze snapped to Alexander, searching his face for an explanation. Alexander swallowed hard, his throat dry. That's my name. The Ethan nodded faintly as though he had expected the reaction. I don't know why I remember it, but I do. Silence fell in the car, thick and suffocating. The chauffeur's eyes flickered briefly in the rearview mirror, then quickly back to the road. Isabella reached for Alexander's hand, but he pulled it away, lost in a whirlpool of confusion and dread. This wasn't chance. This wasn't coincidence. The scar, the name, the eyes. But it was impossible. His son was dead. He had seen the lifeless body with his own eyes. Unless, Ethan. Alexander said hoarsely, old are you? The boy frowned, counting on his fingers before answering. 10. The same age his son would have been if he had survived. Alexander's chest ached with a wild, dangerous hope. But no, logic fought back. His son had died in the crash. There had been no mistake, no miracle survival. He had buried him. Hadn't he? Isabella leaned closer, whispering urgently. Alex, this can't be ignored. You have to find out where he really came from. Yes, Alexander murmured, his voice low, determined. I will. But before he could ask another question, Ethan shifted uneasily and spoke words that sent ice coursing through Alexander's veins. I know why you left me. The boy whispered. She told me. Alexander's heart stopped. His voice cracked when he asked, Who told you that? Ethan's answer was barely a breath. Your wife. How could Ethan know anything about Alexander's late wife? The mother who had died years ago with their son, unless the truth about that night was far darker than Alexander ever imagined. The limousine glided silently through the rain-polished streets, but inside, silence was anything but peaceful. Alexander's pulse thundered in his ears as Ethan's words replayed like a broken record. I know why you left me. She told me, your wife. It was impossible. His wife, Clara, had died in the same accident as their son. He had stood over both coffins, lowered both into the earth, mourned until there was nothing left to mourn. And yet here was a boy, a stranger who carried the same eyes as his dead son, whispering about conversations with the woman buried years ago. Alexander leaned forward, his voice rough, urgent. Ethan, what did you mean? My wife, Clara, how could she have spoken to you? Ethan pulled the blanket tighter around himself, his small frame trembling. He looked frightened, but not of Alexander, more of what he was about to say. She comes in my dreams, he murmured. She tells me things. About you. About me. Isabella gasped softly, her hand flying to her lips. Alex. This is... Quiet. Alexander snapped, his eyes locked on Ethan. What exactly did she tell you? The boy's voice was barely a whisper. That you loved me. That you never wanted to leave but you had to. That one day you'd find me again. A painful lump rose in Alexander's throat. His rational mind screamed that this was nothing more than a child's desperate fantasy, but deep inside, something twisted. Clara had always said strange things, spoken in riddles about fate and how life had plans beyond their control. Could it be that? No, he shut the thought down. Impossible. But Ethan wasn't finished. His gray, blue eyes shimmered in the dim light of the limousine. She also said someone took me away. That you don't know the whole story. Alexander's world tilted. Took you away? Ethan, what do you mean? The boy shook his head quickly as though afraid he had already said too much. His thin fingers gripped the seatbelt, his knuckles white. Alexander sat back, running a trembling hand across his face. Memories of that night flooded back. The headlights in the rain, the crash, the smell of burning rubber and broken glass. He had been told it was fatal, no survivors except himself. He had believed it because he'd seen Clara and Ethan lying still. But what if the story he had been given wasn't the truth? Isabella reached for his hand again, her voice urgent but gentle. Alex, listen to me. Maybe this is crazy. Maybe it's grief playing tricks on you. But what if it's not? What if this boy is the key to what really happened that night? Alexander's eyes darkened with a determination he hadn't felt in years. Then I'll find out. I don't care how many graves I have to dig up to do it. The car slowed as they neared Alexander's estate, a sprawling mansion of glass and stone perched above the city. Normally, he found comfort in its walls, its distance from the chaos of the world. Tonight, it felt cold, foreboding, as if it too held secrets waiting to surface. When the chauffeur opened the door, Ethan hesitated, shrinking back against the seat. Are you going to send me away? He asked quietly. Alexander's chest ached. He shook his head firmly. No, Ethan. You're staying with me, at least until I get answers. The boy's eyes softened with a flicker of trust. But as Alexander helped him out of the car, he noticed something he hadn't before. Around Ethan's neck, tucked beneath the ragged collar of his shirt, was a chain. Alexander froze. He knew that chain. He had given it to his son on his 5th birthday. A small silver locket engraved with the letter E. His trembling fingers reached for it, pulling it gently into view. The locket gleamed under the porch light. Identical. Unmistakable. And when Alexander opened it, his heart nearly stopped. Inside was the faded photograph he had placed there himself years ago, Clara smiling, holding their little boy in her arms. Ethan gasped, stepping back, his hand flying to the locket as though to protect it. Where did you get this? Alexander demanded, his voice raw. The boy's lips quivered. His answer came in a whisper. She said it was mine because I'm your son. Could Ethan truly be the son Alexander thought he buried? If so, who lied to him about that tragic night? And why? The truth threatens to unravel not only his past but also the future he thought he had secured. Alexander stood frozen on the mansion's grand porch, the rain dripping from his coat, his hand trembling around the tiny silver locket. The past he had spent years burying now stared him in the face, gleaming in the glow of the porch light. The photo inside, the one he had placed there with trembling fingers a lifetime ago, was proof. Proof that the boy before him wasn't just a resemblance. He might truly be Ethan, but how? He remembered the funeral, the casket, the way the earth swallowed the last piece of his world. He had believed his son was gone, beyond all hope. Now, as the boy clutched the locket like a shield, Alexander's heart battled between wild hope and suffocating dread. "Ethan," Alexander whispered, kneeling in front of him, his voice breaking, "do you understand what this is? This locket, it belonged to my son. Where did you get it? Who gave it to you?" The boy's lips trembled. His fingers closed tightly over the silver, as though afraid it would be stolen away. "I told you," he whispered. "She gave it to me." Alexander's breath hitched. "She? Who?" "My mom," Ethan said softly, almost inaudibly. "She said it would keep me safe. That one day it would bring me home." The words tore into Alexander like glass. His wife Clara was dead. He had buried her too. And yet Ethan spoke as though she had been alive long after the night of the crash. Isabella's eyes widened. "Alex," she whispered urgently, "if Clara gave him this locket, then she must have survived too, at least for a while." The ground beneath Alexander's feet felt as though it had given way. His world, built on grief and silence, was crumbling into questions he wasn't ready to face. Had Clara lived? Had she hidden their son from him? And if so, why? Ethan tugged at his coat gently, pulling him from the spiral. "I don't remember everything," the boy admitted, his voice small. "I only remember her holding me. She was crying. She said you loved me, but you couldn't come. And then," his voice faltered, "then she was gone, and he found me." Alexander's eyes darkened. "The man from the alley?" Ethan nodded. "He said I owed him. That he'd tell me the truth one day." Alexander rose, fury and grief battling inside him. If this man had taken Ethan after Clara's death, if he had stolen his son, left him to rot on the streets, then Alexander would stop at nothing to make him pay. He guided Ethan into the mansion, the warmth of the grand hall pressing against the cold storm outside. The marble floors gleamed, the chandeliers glowed, but all of it felt empty compared to the small, shivering boy clinging to his hand. Isabella hurried in after them, her face pale. "Alex," she said carefully, once Ethan had been led to the fireplace and wrapped in a thick blanket, "you need to be sure. Hope can blind you. You saw a body. You buried your son." Alexander turned on her sharply, his voice raw. "And yet here he is, my son's locket around his neck, his eyes, his name. Tell me, what more proof do I need?" Her lips pressed into a thin line, but she said nothing. For hours, Alexander sat by the fire, watching Ethan slowly drift into sleep, the glow of the flame softening his thin features. And in the flicker of light, Alexander saw not just a boy, but the ghost of a child he had lost. As dawn began to break through the rain-streaked windows, Alexander made a silent vow he would uncover the truth of that night, no matter what it cost. But just as resolve hardened in him, the household silence was shattered. The butler entered nervously, holding a plain envelope. "Sir, this was left at the gate." Alexander frowned, taking it. The envelope was damp from the rain, the handwriting scrawled in a jagged, hurried script. He tore it open, his eyes racing over the words. And his blood ran cold. "If you want to keep the boy alive this time, stop digging for the truth. Some graves are better left closed. Who is threatening Alexander, and why do they want him to stop searching?" The warning suggests a conspiracy that stretches far beyond a street vagrant. And Alexander's fight for Ethan may be more dangerous than he ever imagined. The evening sky was painted in streaks of violet and fading amber as Adrian sat by the window of his study, a crystal glass of untouched whiskey resting on the table. The city lights glittered below, but his eyes weren't drawn to wealth or power tonight. They were fixed on the reflection of a boy's face in his memory. Oliver's tender smile, the way his eyes had sparkled when he laughed, the small hand that had once gripped his so tightly. But now, every time Adrian closed his eyes, it wasn't Oliver he saw. It was the boy from the street, the fragile child with hollow cheeks, desperate eyes, and that uncanny resemblance. The image had been haunting him, clawing at the walls of his mind, demanding his attention. His heart wrestled with two truths: Oliver was gone, and yet this boy looked as if life had carved Oliver's face into another child. Adrian hated the thought of hope. It had betrayed him once before when doctors promised Oliver would recover. Hope had felt like a lie. Yet now something about this boy tugged at him in a way he couldn't ignore. Lena entered the room quietly, her presence soft yet heavy with unspoken words. She placed a hand on Adrian's shoulder, sensing the storm inside him. "You've been sitting here for hours," she whispered. "You're torturing yourself." Adrian exhaled, his voice raw. "I can't get him out of my head, Lena. That boy, it's as if fate threw him into our path for a reason. But why? Why now, after all these years?" Lena bit her lip, her eyes glistening with conflict. "Maybe it's not fate. Maybe it's just a cruel reminder. Life loves to echo our wounds, doesn't it? You saw a resemblance, and now your heart won't let go." Adrian shook his head. "No, Lena, it's more than resemblance. When he looked at me, it was like he knew me. Like he was searching for something in me. And when I reached out," his voice cracked. "When I reached out, he didn't flinch. Not like the others. He let me touch his arm. Do you know what that means?" Lena's throat tightened. She wanted to be strong, to guide him away from this dangerous obsession, but she had felt it too. The undeniable pull when she looked at that boy. And what if you're wrong, Adrian? What if this boy is just a child burdened with misfortune, and you're projecting Oliver onto him? What happens to you then? Adrian closed his eyes, pain etched across his face. Then I'll know. But if I don't find out, if I don't at least try, I'll never forgive myself. The silence between them thickened, stretching like an unhealed wound. Lena finally pulled away, turning to the shelves where photographs of Oliver still rested in golden frames. She ran her fingers over the smiling face of the child they had lost. You're not the only one who sees him, Adrian, she admitted, her voice trembling. When I looked into that boy's eyes, I saw something too. It wasn't just resemblance. It was a shadow, a connection. Adrian's head snapped toward her, his heart racing. You felt it too? Lena nodded, tears brimming. Yes, and that terrifies me more than anything. Because if there's even the slightest chance, Adrian, what does that mean? What truth are we about to uncover? The room felt smaller suddenly, the weight of possibility pressing against the walls. Adrian's heart pounded with renewed determination. He knew what he had to do. He had to find the boy again, no matter what it cost. As the clock ticked closer to midnight, Adrian whispered, more to himself than to Lena, "This isn't over. Tomorrow I'll start searching. I have resources, I'll find him." Lena froze. For the briefest moment, she thought she heard something else, an almost imperceptible sound, like a faint whisper brushing against the room. She turned sharply, her eyes darting toward the hallway. Nothing was there, just silence. Adrian looked at her curiously. "What is it?" Her lips parted, her face pale. "I thought I heard someone whispering, but there was no one, no voice, no presence. Only the photograph of Oliver on the shelf, his smile frozen in time, and the chilling realization that sometimes, the past doesn't stay buried." The whisper lingered in her mind as they sat in silence, soft, fragile, and haunting. And though she tried to dismiss it as her imagination, a shiver ran down her spine, because it hadn't been just any whisper. It had sounded eerily like a child's voice saying, "Find me." The next evening, Daniel sat in his study, staring at the fireplace without really seeing the flames. The wine glass in his hand remained untouched, its surface catching the glow of the fire. His mind was elsewhere, locked on the boy named Jacob, the boy whose presence had shattered the fragile walls he had built around his grief. He had not told anyone, not even Alina, but he had already sent one of his private investigators to discreetly gather information about the child. Every hour that passed without news felt like a torment. A deep, gnawing need had taken root inside him, a need to know who Jacob was, and why fate had thrown the boy into his path. The sound of soft footsteps broke his reverie. Elena entered the study, her expression hesitant. She carried something in her hand, wrapped in a faded piece of silk cloth. "I went into the attic today," she said quietly. Daniel looked up, confusion flickering across his face. He hadn't been inside the attic in years. It was where he had hidden away everything connected to Michael. The toys, the clothes, the photographs, even the tiny shoes he had once bought for his son. Elena approached, kneeling beside his chair, and carefully unfolded the silk. Inside was an old photograph. Daniel's breath caught in his throat the moment he saw it. It was Michael, smiling radiant, no older than 9. He was wearing his favorite red sweater, the one Daniel used to tease him about because it had a tiny hole near the sleeve. "I thought you should see this," Elena whispered. "Because Daniel, when I saw Jacob yesterday, it wasn't just that he looked like Michael. It was more than resemblance. It felt like looking at him again. The same eyes, the same way he tilted his head. It frightened me." Daniel took the photograph in trembling hands, his chest tightening as though the air itself had grown heavy. He hadn't cried in years, but his eyes burned now, filling with tears that threatened to fall. "Elena, my mind is playing tricks on me," he muttered, though his voice cracked. "Michael is gone. He died. I buried him. There's no logic in what we're feeling. Logic has nothing to do with grief," she replied softly, touching his arm. "And sometimes, fate brings things into our lives for reasons we can't explain." Daniel shook his head, but the photograph blurred as tears slipped down his face. He remembered Michael's laugh, the way he would run down the halls of their estate, leaving trails of mischief behind him. He remembered holding him close during storms, whispering that nothing in the world could harm him, until the world did. He slammed the photograph down on the table, his grief quickly twisting into anger. "Don't you understand, Elena? If I let myself believe, even for a second, that Jacob is anything more than a coincidence, I'll lose myself. I'll drown in hope, and hope is more dangerous than despair." Elena didn't flinch at his harsh tone. Instead, she leaned closer, her eyes steady, unwavering. "Then drown, Daniel, because sometimes drowning is the only way to learn how to breathe again." Her words struck him like lightning, terrifying yet awakening. At that very moment, the butler knocked on the door. His voice was low but urgent. Sir, you asked me to inform you immediately if your investigator called. He's on the line. Daniel's heart skipped. His hand trembled as he reached for the phone. On the other end, the investigator's voice was calm, but every word cut through the silence like a blade. Mr. Hale, I found something. The boy, Jacob. He's been living in shelters on and off. His mother died years ago. But here's the strange part. According to records, his mother once worked here in your estate. She was your son Michael's old nanny. Daniel's grip on the phone tightened until his knuckles turned white. His gaze fell on the photograph of Michael lying on the table. The resemblance suddenly no longer felt like coincidence. Jacob's mother was once Michael's nanny, a link that Daniel never expected, pulling the mystery deeper into his own past. The world seemed to move in slow motion the morning Edward received the call. He was sitting at the head of the long dining table, a half-eaten breakfast in front of him. The sun had just begun to filter through the tall windows, bathing the room in a pale, reluctant light. Catherine sat across from him, sipping her coffee, her fingers tapping nervously against the porcelain cup. When Edward's phone buzzed, his hand trembled as he picked it up. Every heartbeat felt like thunder in his chest. He pressed the device to his ear, and as the voice of the doctor spoke, his world contracted into silence. "We have the DNA results, Mr. Whitmore," the man said. There was a pause so long Edward thought he might faint. Then the words came, measured and clear. "The child is a match. He is biologically yours." Edward froze. He couldn't move, couldn't breathe. It was as if his entire body had been encased in ice. Across the table, Catherine's eyes widened in horror, her cup slipping from her hand and shattering against the marble floor. "He's mine," Edward whispered, his voice hoarse, raw, as though it belonged to someone else. Catherine shot to her feet, pacing furiously. "This isn't possible, Edward. Listen to me. This is some mistake. It has to be." But Edward wasn't listening. His mind reeled backward through time, back to the day they had buried their son, back to the nights of unbearable grief, and to the years Catherine had been his only anchor. If the child was his, then what did it mean? That his son had somehow survived? That there had been deception? Or had Catherine hidden something all these years? He stood abruptly, his chair screeching against the floor. Where is he? Where is Daniel? His voice thundered across the room, shaking Catherine out of her frenzy. "Is not your son, Edward?" Catherine snapped, desperation burning in her tone. "You buried your son, remember? Don't let this stray fool you." Edward's eyes narrowed. "Then explain the test, Catherine. Explain why a boy living on the streets has my blood running through his veins." Her lips trembled, her defenses crumbling like a sandcastle at the mercy of the tide. For the first time, Edward saw fear, real fear, in her eyes. She looked like someone caught between telling the truth and preserving a fragile illusion. "I can't," she whispered, turning away. Edward stepped closer, his voice dropping to a dangerous calm. "What have you done, Catherine?" Tears welled in her eyes, but she refused to meet his gaze. Instead, she sank into the nearest chair, clutching her head in her hands. The silence that followed was unbearable, broken only by the frantic pounding of Edward's heart. He could not wait any longer. That evening, he drove himself to the small guest house where the child had been staying under the care of a social worker. As he stepped through the door, he saw the boy curled up on a worn sofa, hugging his knees, his eyes watching him with quiet wariness. For a moment, Edward could only stare. Every line of the boy's face echoed his late son, same jaw, same piercing eyes, same restless energy that had once filled his home with laughter. Edward knelt down, his voice cracking as he whispered, "Daniel." The boy blinked, confusion flickering across his features. "My name's not Daniel," he said softly. "It's Sam." Edward's chest clenched. "But the test, it says you're my son." Sam lowered his gaze, his small voice trembling. "I don't know who you are, sir. All I know is my mom told me never to come near this place. She said you'd hate me if you knew the truth." Edward's breath caught. The words sliced through him, sharper than any blade. "Your mother?" Sam nodded slowly, tears glistening in his eyes. "She said you left us, that you didn't want me." Edward staggered back, his world collapsing under the weight of those words. Catherine had told him their son was dead. Yet here stood a boy alive, breathing, carrying his blood. And somewhere out there, a woman had raised him alone, in pain, believing Edward had abandoned them. But who was she? Edward's knees threatened to give way. His hands shook as he reached for the boy, but the truth in Sam's eyes left him paralyzed. A new horror seeped into his bones. If Sam was truly his son, then Catherine had carried a lie so monstrous it could destroy everything he thought he knew. And as Edward sat there, trying to process the impossible, Sam whispered one final sentence that shattered the last of his world. "She told me her name was Emily." Emily. The name Edward had not spoken in years. The name of the woman he once loved before Catherine. His blood turned cold. The hospital room was quiet, bathed in soft light from the muted lamps along the wall. The The steady beeping of the heart monitor filled the silence with an eerie rhythm, one that Samuel had come to associate with life's fragility. Daniel lay there, small and pale, his chest rising and falling with difficulty. For a moment, Samuel was struck by how breakable children were, how easy it was for their entire world to collapse, and how hard it was for those who loved them to pick up the pieces. Sophia stood at the bedside, her hand gently brushing Daniel's hair back. Her eyes shimmered with tears, but there was a strange strength in them too. She looked at Samuel with a tenderness he had not seen in years. "He's strong," she whispered. "Just like your son was." Samuel swallowed hard. He had spent years avoiding the word was. He hated its finality, the way it stripped life away and left only memory. But tonight, he realized something he hadn't before. His son hadn't just vanished into nothingness. He lived on. In every act of love, Samuel still had the courage to give. The doctor entered quietly, clipboard in hand. "He's stable," he said, giving them both a weary smile. "But he'll need long-term care. This wasn't just exposure. It looks like he's been living without proper nutrition for years. His body's weak, but with the right support, he has a chance." Samuel felt his chest tighten. A chance. That was more than he had once been given for his own boy. He turned his gaze toward Daniel, and in that frail child's face, he no longer saw only the ghost of his son. He saw hope, a chance at redemption, at love reborn. As the hours passed, Samuel didn't leave the boy's side. He held Daniel's hand, whispering promises he wasn't sure the child could hear. Promises that he wouldn't walk away, that he wouldn't let him suffer again, that this time he would do everything right. Sophia sat near him, her presence soft yet grounding, her silent strength reminding him he wasn't alone. When dawn crept in through the blinds, Samuel finally noticed Daniel stirring. The boy's eyelids fluttered open, revealing frightened but curious eyes. He turned his gaze to Samuel, confusion written across his face. Why are you here?" Daniel's voice was fragile, barely above a whisper. Samuel leaned forward, emotions clogging his throat. "Because I should have been here long ago. Because no child deserves to be alone in this world." He hesitated, then added, "If you'll let me, I want to be your family." The tears welled in Daniel's eyes as he blinked, searching for sincerity in Samuel's expression. He said nothing, but his tiny fingers curled around Samuel's hand with a grip so firm, it felt like an answer. Sophia wiped her tears silently, watching the bond form before her. In that moment, Samuel knew something inside him had shifted forever. He was no longer defined only by his loss, nor trapped in the cold halls of wealth and regret. He was a father again, not by blood, but by choice. The twist came later that evening, when a social worker arrived with files about Daniel's past. She set the papers on the table, her eyes flicking between Samuel and Sophia. "You need to know this before moving forward," she said softly. Daniel's mother, she listed no father on the records. But there was one clue, a name. "Your last name, Mr. Hale." Samuel froze, his breath caught in his throat. The room tilted. Sophia gasped. "What does that mean?" The social worker hesitated before answering. "It means Daniel might not just remind you of your son. He could be your son." The world seemed to stop. Samuel's heart thundered in his chest as Daniel's fragile hand tightened around his. And for the first time in years, Samuel didn't feel haunted. He felt alive.
A wealthy man thought his past was buried forever, until one freezing night, a homeless boy appeared with the same face as the son he lost. What began as a moment of pity soon unraveled shocking secrets, betrayal, and a truth that could shatter his entire life. This is not just a story of wealth and loss. It's a haunting reminder that some ghosts of the past return in flesh and blood when you least expect it.